Imagine being married for 40 years to a man the world calls a monster. That was Shirley Smith's life with billionaire David Schweiber. He was known as a ruthless shark, cold, distant, and obsessed with profit. But David had one strange habit. Every Tuesday at 10 a.m., he visited a small local bank completely alone. When David died, the vultures circled. Federal investigators and David's greedy nephew, Marcus, were convinced those Tuesday trips were for money laundering. Under immense pressure, Shirley finally opened safe deposit box number 402, terrifyingly expecting to find evidence of a crime. But she didn't find gold or blackmail. She found redemption. The box was filled with 40 years of receipts and handwritten journals. David had been secretly paying the medical bills for thousands of victims of a chemical spill his company caused years ago. Beside the receipts were daily letters to Shirley, confessing the deep love and guilt he was too emotionally stunted to speak aloud. Shirley realized her cold husband was actually a silent guardian. Armed with the truth, she stopped Marcus's hostile takeover and saved David's legacy. It makes you wonder, do we ever truly know the people closest to us? I want to know your take. Would you have forgiven David for keeping this a secret for 40 years? Let me know in the comments below. And if you love stories with a twist, make sure to smash that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a video. My husband went to the bank every Tuesday at exactly 10 a.m. For 40 years of marriage, through recessions and booms, scandals and acquisitions, David Schweiger never missed it, not once. When I asked why, he'd straighten his tie, that small, controlling gesture I knew so well, and say the same thing every time. Routine keeps empires standing, Shirley. I believed him. Why wouldn't I? David was a billionaire industrialist. Control was his currency, precision his religion. Our household ran like a corporation. Our social calendar was strategically mapped 6 months in advance. Our marriage, he'd once told a reporter, is his most stable investment. The day he died, I was selecting orchids for the winter conservatory. Marcus, David's nephew, called with a voice I'd never heard from him before. Smooth, almost eager, like he'd been rehearsing. "Aunt Shirley, there's been an incident. Uncle David, you need to come to the office." By the time my driver navigated through Midtown, David was already gone. Massive stroke during a board meeting. His company physician said it was instant, his hand still gripping a Mont Blanc pen, a half-signed merger document beneath it. Efficient, even in death, the way David would have orchestrated it if he could. I didn't cry at the funeral. The 1,000 mourners, politicians, rivals, executives who'd feared him, assumed I was performing the stoic widow role David would have expected, the marble wife in the satin suit, as composed as the bronze sculpture in our foyer. But the truth was simpler and more unsettling. I felt something I hadn't felt in decades. Curiosity. Not about his fortune, not about the 16-page obituary in the Times that called him the shark who built an empire. I was curious about the man who stood in line at a small community bank every Tuesday for 40 years, waiting with strangers, when he could have bought the entire building with a phone call. I just didn't know yet that the answer would break me. 4 days after the funeral, his estate attorney requested an emergency meeting. Gerald Finch had served the Schweiger family for 30 years, and I'd never seen his hands shake before. He slid a single document across the mahogany conference table. "Mrs. Schweiger, there's an irregularity in the will. A safe deposit box, number 402, at Barton Street Community Bank. The contents are left solely to you, with explicit instructions that no one, not the executors, not the board, not even federal auditors, may access it without your personal authorization." He paused, and I saw something in his eyes I'd seen in others when they spoke about David. Fear. Across the table, Marcus leaned forward, his smile sharp as wire. "For everyone's sake, Aunt Shirley, I hope we locate it soon." That night, alone in David's library, the one room in our mansion that still smelled like him, leather and old paper, and the faint metallic scent of ambition, I stared at the bookshelves and wondered what kind of man I'd actually married. The shark everyone feared? Or the stranger who stood in that bank line every Tuesday, clutching something I was never allowed to see? The answer was waiting in a small brass key I didn't know was taped behind our honeymoon photograph, the last picture where David's smile reached his eyes. The conference room on the 47th floor had been designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city like a conquest. The table, a single slab of imported walnut, could seat 20. Today, it seated 12, and every one of them wanted something from me. Gerald Finch cleared his throat, the sound swallowed by the oppressive silence. He'd laid out the will in sections, each page crisp and clinical, as if David's entire existence could be reduced to numbered clauses and legal terminology. Mrs. Schweiger retains full ownership of the primary residence, the Connecticut estate, and the art collection, Gerald read, his voice steady but his fingers white-knuckled on the document. The controlling shares of Schweiger Industries are to be distributed as follows. Get to the box. Marcus didn't raise his voice, he didn't need to. He sat 3 chairs down from me, suit jacket off, sleeves rolled up like he was ready to do manual labor. At 39, he had David's build but none of his restraint. Where David had been a scalpel, Marcus was a hammer. Gerald's jaw tightened. "Mr. Schweiger, I must follow the proper—" "The Tuesday box, Gerald." He leaned forward, elbows on the table. "Safe deposit box 402. Everyone in this room has heard the rumors. Let's stop pretending we're here for the real estate portfolio." I watched 3 board members exchange glances. Richard Chen, the CFO, shifted in his seat. Patricia Voss, who'd served under David for 26 years, wouldn't meet my eyes. They knew something. They all knew something. "The contents of Safe Deposit Box 402 are bequeathed solely to Shirley Smith Schweiger, with no obligation of disclosure to any party, including this board, federal regulators, or—" "That's horseshit." Marcus stood, the chair scraping back like a gunshot. "My uncle built this company from nothing. If he was hiding assets—" He wasn't hiding assets. The words came out harder than I intended. 12 pairs of eyes turned to me. I kept mine on Marcus. David didn't hide, he controlled. There's a difference. "Then you know what's in the box." It wasn't a question, it was an accusation. "No," I said, simply, "I don't." Marcus smiled, and I suddenly understood why David had kept him out of the inner circle. There was hunger in that smile, the kind that ate everything it touched. "Then let's go get it together, Aunt Shirley. Right now. I'll drive." "The key," interrupted Gerald quietly, "is missing. Mr. Schweiger's personal effects have been thoroughly inventoried. It's not among them." The room erupted. Patricia's hand flew to her mouth. Richard Chen swore softly in Mandarin. Marcus slammed his palm on the table hard enough to make the water glasses jump. But I was watching Gerald, and I saw what the others missed. The tiny muscle twitch beneath his left eye, the same tic David had when he was lying to regulators. Gerald knew where the key was, which meant David had told him, which meant my husband had planned for this moment and hadn't trusted anyone in this room, including me.
They came at dawn, which seemed unnecessarily dramatic. I was in the conservatory with my coffee when I heard the engines, 3 black SUVs crunching up the gravel drive like they owned it. Maria, our housekeeper, appeared in the doorway with a face I'd never seen her make before. "Mrs. Schweiger, there are men." "Federal agents." I set down my cup. The orchids I'd been inspecting suddenly seemed absurd, frivolous. Let them in, Maria. They'll come in anyway. The lead agent was a woman, which surprised me more than it should have. 40-something, dark suit, hair pulled back so tight it looked painful. She showed me a badge and a warrant in the same efficient motion. Special Agent Caroline Reeves, FBI Financial Crimes Division. We have authorization to search the premises for documents related to Schweiger Industries' offshore accounts, specifically transactions dating back to 1985. 1985. I heard my voice from somewhere far away. That's the year we married. Yes, ma'am. Her eyes were sympathetic but unyielding. We'd like to ask you some questions. Is there somewhere private we can talk? I led her to David's library because I couldn't think of anywhere else. The irony wasn't lost on me, being interrogated in the one room that had always been his sanctuary, not mine. I sat in the leather chair I'd seen in the uploaded image, the one that had molded itself to David's shape over 4 decades. It felt like sitting in a stranger's lap. Agent Reeves settled across from me, a younger agent standing by the door like I might make a run for it. Outside, I could hear the team moving through the house, drawers opening, files being photographed, the clinical violation of it all. Mrs. Schweiger, what can you tell me about your husband's Tuesday bank visits? Nothing. The word felt like surrender. I never asked details. In 40 years, you never asked? I looked at her directly then and let her see what I was only beginning to admit to myself. Agent Reeves, I was married to one of the most powerful men in the country. He came home every night. He never raised his voice. He remembered my birthday. I didn't ask questions because I was afraid of the answers. Something flickered in her expression. Recognition, maybe. Pity. Did he ever mention a chemical spill, an incident at the Newark facility in March of 1984? The words hit me like ice water. No. 17 workers were hospitalized. 3 died. The EPA investigation was inconclusive. She slid a photograph across David's desk. Young men, some Latino, some black, lying on gurneys. Your husband's company was never formally charged. I stared at the image, then at the rows of books surrounding us. First editions, leather-bound, organized by color. I'd always thought they were for show. Now I wondered if David had actually read them, searching for something. Absolution, perhaps. Instructions on how to be human. I don't know who my husband was, I said quietly. I thought I did, but I was wrong. Agent Reeves closed her folder. Then help us find out, Mrs. Schweiger. Where's the key? They left at noon, taking 17 boxes of documents and my illusions with them. Agent Reeves handed me a business card as she walked out, her expression carefully neutral. If you find anything, Mrs. Schweiger, anything at all. I stood in the foyer long after the SUVs disappeared, listening to the house settle back into its expensive silence. Maria hovered nearby, wringing her hands, but I waved her away. I needed to think. More than that, I needed to understand. David had hidden the key somewhere he knew I'd eventually find it. That was the only explanation that made sense. He'd written that will knowing it would send everyone searching, knowing Marcus would circle like a vulture, knowing the FBI would come with their warrants and their photographs of dying men. He'd orchestrated all of it, which meant the key was a message, not just a key. I started in his bedroom, our bedroom, technically, though we'd slept in separate wings for the last decade. His closet still smelled like him, that particular combination of expensive cologne and the starch Maria used on his shirts. I went through every pocket, every shoe, every folded handkerchief. Nothing. His desk was next. The FBI had already torn through it, but I checked anyway, running my fingers along the underside of drawers, looking for tape or hidden compartments. I found a spare set of cufflinks and 3 paper clips. By 4 o'clock, I'd searched every logical place and several illogical ones. The grandfather clock in the hole, the false bottom in his humidor, the lining of his favorite briefcase. My hands were shaking, and I couldn't tell if it was from exhaustion or the growing certainty that I'd failed some test David had set for me 40 years ago. I ended up back in the library, slumped in his chair, staring at the bookshelves like they might offer answers. The family photos were arranged on the shelf behind the desk, our wedding, various charity galas, David shaking hands with 3 different presidents, a visual resume of a successful life. But there was one photo that didn't fit the pattern. Smaller than the others, silver frame tarnished at the edges. Our honeymoon in Santorini, 1985. I was laughing at something off camera, my hair wild in the Mediterranean wind, and David was smiling, not the controlled smile he'd perfected for cameras and board meetings, a real smile, unguarded, almost boyish. I'd forgotten he'd ever looked at me like that, forgotten he'd ever looked at anything like that. I picked up the frame, and something about the weight felt wrong. My hands knew before my brain did. I flipped it over, pried open the backing with a letter opener, and there it was, a small brass key, taped to the cardboard backing with yellowed Scotch tape that'd probably been there for decades. Beneath it, in David's precise handwriting on a strip of paper, "For when you're ready to know me." I wept then, holding our younger faces and the key that would unravel everything.
I didn't move for a long time, just sat there with the key pressed between my palms like a talisman, David's note staring up at me from the desk. For when you're ready to know me. 40 years of marriage, and he'd been waiting for me to be ready. The anger came suddenly, white-hot and clarifying. I stood, slipping the key into my jacket pocket, and that's when I saw it. A tiny red light blinking from behind the curtain valance, so small I might have missed it if I hadn't been looking at the right angle. A camera. My blood went cold. I forced myself to move naturally, returning the photo frame to its place, adjusting it slightly like I was just tidying up. Then I walked casually to the window, gazing out at the grounds while my mind raced. The FBI had been here for hours. They'd had access to every room, and Agent Reeves had been so very interested in whether I'd find anything. I touched my pocket, feeling the key's outline through the fabric. If they were watching, they knew I'd found it, which meant I maybe had an hour before they came back with questions I wasn't ready to answer, before Marcus got a phone call from whoever he'd paid off inside the bureau. I walked upstairs to my bedroom, movements unhurried, a grieving widow retiring for the afternoon. Once inside, I went straight to my closet and changed quickly. Dark slacks, a simple sweater, flat shoes. I pulled my hair back, swapped my statement jewelry for pearl studs David's mother had given me decades ago. In the mirror, I looked like someone's secretary, unremarkable, invisible. Good. This house had been built in 1912 by a railroad baron paranoid about labor riots. David had been fascinated by the network of servant passages when we'd first toured it. Narrow corridors hidden behind false panels, staircases tucked inside walls, exits disguised as landscaping features. He'd made me memorize them during that first year of marriage, calling it a game. Every castle needs its secrets, surely. I'd thought he was being romantic. Now I wondered if he'd been preparing me. I pressed the panel beside my dresser, and it swung inward with a soft click. The passage beyond was dark and smelled of old wood and dust. I pulled out my phone, turned on the flashlight, and stepped inside. The route took me down 2 floors, through sections of the house I hadn't visited in years. I could hear Maria vacuuming somewhere above me, oblivious. Could hear the grandfather clock in the main hall chiming 5. The exit opened into the old root cellar, which connected to the greenhouse, which had a service gate that led to the street behind the property. No cameras, no security detail, just an old woman who'd lived in this house long enough to know all its secrets. I emerged 3 blocks away, just another silver-haired woman waiting at a bus stop in the fading light. The key burned in my pocket, like a promise, or a threat. The bus dropped me 6 blocks from Barton Street. I could have called my driver, but that would have left a trail. Besides, David had taken this route every Tuesday for 40 years. If I wanted to understand him, I needed to walk where he'd walked. The neighborhood surprised me. Not poor, exactly, but working class in a way I'd forgotten existed. Bodegas with hand-painted signs, a laundromat where women folded clothes in the window, children playing soccer in a pocket park, their shouts echoing off brick buildings that had stood before David was born. This was where my husband had spent his Tuesdays, not in boardrooms or country clubs, but here, among people who probably couldn't have named his company if asked. "Excuse me, miss." An older man at a flower cart was looking at me. "You buying or just browsing?" "Browsing," I said, then paused. Something made me ask, "Did you know a man named David Schweiger? He used to come through here on Tuesdays." The man's weathered face lit up. "Mr. David? Sure, sure. Terrible thing his passing. Saw it in the paper." He selected a white rose from his bucket and handed it to me before I could protest. He bought one every Tuesday, same flower, said it was for someone special. I stared at the rose, its petals perfect and cold. He never brought them home. Maybe they weren't for home, the flower seller shrugged. Good man, though, quiet. Always asked about my daughter. She's got the lupus, you know. Medical bills are murder. Mr. David, he listened, really listened. Not many people do that. I paid for the rose I hadn't wanted and kept walking, my mind reeling. 2 blocks later, I passed a man sitting against a shuttered storefront, a cardboard sign propped beside him. "Veteran, anything helps." He looked up as I approached, and his eyes widened. "You're her. You're Mrs. Schweiger." I froze. "How did you—" "He showed me your picture once, from his wallet." The man struggled to his feet, and I saw he was missing his left leg below the knee. "Ma'am, I'm sorry for your loss. Your husband was a good man, best man I ever met, and I served with heroes." "I don't understand." The words came out barely a whisper. "My husband he wasn't." Every Tuesday for, hell, must have been 15 years, stopped to talk, asked about my daughter. She's 8 now. He paid for her school supplies last fall, didn't make a thing of it, just handed me an envelope and told me kids need good pencils. The veteran's voice cracked. Said he knew what it was like to fail people who depended on you. Said he was trying to do better. I couldn't speak, couldn't process what I was hearing. This wasn't the David I'd known. The David I'd married was brilliant and cold and controlled. He didn't stop to talk to flower sellers or homeless veterans. He didn't carry pictures of me in his wallet. Did he? "The bank's just ahead," the veteran said gently. "That's where you're going, right? To the box." I nodded, not trusting my voice. "Whatever's in there, ma'am, he wanted you to have it. He told me once, everything he did for someone he loved, someone who deserved better than what he knew how to give." The bank was smaller than I had imagined. A single-story brick building wedged between a dry cleaner and a pharmacy, the kind of place that had probably looked exactly the same since 1970. The sign above the door read Barton Street Community Bank in faded gold letters. Marcus's black Mercedes was parked directly in front, taking up 2 spaces. Of course he'd beaten me here. I took a breath, squeezed the key in my pocket, and pushed through the glass door. A bell chimed cheerfully, absurdly normal given what was about to happen. Marcus stood in the center of the small lobby with 2 men in suits flanking him like bookends. A third man, older, expensive haircut, briefcase that probably cost more than the bank's annual revenue, was arguing with someone behind the counter. I don't care what your policy says. My client has legal standing as legal executor of the estate, and we demand access. Mr. Brennan. The voice was calm, female, and utterly unmoved. The safe deposit agreement is explicit. Only Mrs. Shirley Schweiger with proper identification and the physical key may access Box 402. Marcus turned when he heard my name. His smile was all teeth, no warmth. Aunt Shirley, what a coincidence. No, it isn't. I walked past him to the counter where a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and reading glasses on a chain regarded me with something that looked like relief. Mrs. Schweiger, I'm Ellen Vasquez, branch manager. I've been expecting you. She shot Marcus a look that could have frozen vodka. Alone. My client has every right, the expensive lawyer began. Your client, Ellen interrupted, has exactly 0 rights where Box 402 is concerned. Mr. Schweiger was very clear about that. Insistent, actually. He updated the agreement every year for 40 years, and every time the instructions were identical. Mrs. Schweiger, no one else, not even under court order. That's legally dubious at best, the lawyer sputtered. Then sue me. Ellen's smile was pleasant and immovable. Gentlemen, if you're not conducting legitimate business, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Marcus took a step toward me, and one of his security detail moved with him. Shirley, be reasonable. Whatever's in that box affects the entire company, thousands of employees. You can't just... I can. The words came out stronger than I felt. The box is mine. David made sure of that. David was hiding something. Marcus's voice dropped, intimate and poisonous. Don't you want to know what? What if it destroys everything? His legacy, your reputation, the company? Then that's my burden to carry, not yours. For a long moment, nobody moved. The fluorescent lights hummed. Somewhere in the back, a printer whirred. Marcus smiled again, but this time it didn't reach his eyes at all. You were always tougher than you looked, Aunt Shirley. Uncle David used to say that. He gestured to his men, and they filed out, the lawyer muttering into his phone. Marcus paused at the door. I'll be right outside, just in case you need help carrying anything heavy. The threat was clear as glass. Ellen waited until the door closed before speaking. Mrs. Schweiger, I knew your husband for a very long time. Whatever you find in that box, he trusted you with it for a reason. I nodded, suddenly terrified. Can we do this now, before I lose my nerve? Follow me. The vault was smaller than I expected, barely larger than a walk-in closet. Ellen unlocked the outer door with her key, then gestured to the wall of brass boxes, each with its own number plate. Box 402 was at eye level, perfectly positioned so David wouldn't have to bend or reach. Even in this, he'd been methodical. I'll give you privacy, Ellen said softly. Take all the time you need. My hands shook as I inserted the key. It turned smoothly, well-oiled, frequently used. The door swung open, and I pulled out the metal container, surprised by its weight. I set it on the small table in the center of the room, and just stared at it for a moment. For when you're ready to know me. I lifted the lid. The box was packed tight, stuffed with paper. Not cash, not bonds, not blackmail material. Just paper. Receipts. Hundreds of them, organized by year in rubber bands. I pulled out the top bundle, 1985, and my breath caught. Payment to Newark Memorial Hospital, patient Rodriguez Carlos, amount $4,200. Payment to St. Vincent's Medical Center, patient Washington Jerome, amount $8,950. Payment to Children's Hospital, patient Washington Marcus Jr., amount $12,400. There were dozens more, all different names, all different hospitals, all dated within months of that chemical spill Agent Reeves had mentioned. I grabbed another bundle. 1986. Same thing. Different names, but the pattern continued. Beneath the receipts were journals, leather-bound, expensive, at least 20 of them. I opened the first one, dated January 1985, and David's precise handwriting filled the page. Today I stood at Carlos Rodriguez's bedside and watched him struggle to breathe. He has 3 children. His wife cleans houses to make ends meet. The doctors say his lungs will never fully recover. This is my fault. The inspectors I paid off, the safety protocols I ignored to save money. I killed these men as surely as if I'd poisoned them myself. I cannot undo what I've done, but I can pay. For the rest of my life, I can pay. I heard the vault door open behind me. Marcus's voice, sharp and demanding. "Ellen, you can't bar me from—" "Sir, I told you—" "It's fine." I didn't turn around. Let him see. Marcus pushed past Ellen, his lawyer right behind him. He grabbed a handful of receipts, scanning them rapidly, his expression shifting from anticipation to confusion to fury. "Medical bills? This is all medical bills?" He threw them down, papers scattering across the floor. 40 years of Tuesday trips for charity receipts? Where's the real money, Shirley? The offshore accounts? This is the real money, Marcus. I held up a journal, my voice steady despite the tears streaming down my face. This is where it all went. Every Tuesday for 40 years. He paid for what he'd done, for people whose names you'll never know and wouldn't care about if you did. Marcus stared at me like I'd lost my mind. "It's just trash, sentimental garbage. This doesn't help anyone. It doesn't prove anything except that he was a man who tried to make things right." Marcus's laugh was bitter, defeated. "You really are a fool, Aunt Shirley." He stormed out, his lawyer scrambling after him. I sat alone in the vault, surrounded by 40 years of penance, and finally understood the man I'd married.
Ellen brought me water and tissues without being asked, then quietly closed the vault door behind her. I was alone with 40 years of my husband's secret life, and I didn't know where to begin. I started with the first journal, January 1985, the month we married. The early entries were clinical, almost like a ledger. Names, injuries, payments made. David documenting his penance with the same precision he'd used to build an empire. But halfway through February, the tone shifted. Shirley asked me today why I seemed distracted. I wanted to tell her about Carlos, about the 3 men who died, about the 17 whose lives I destroyed. But how do you confess something like that to a woman in a white dress who still believes you're decent? So I kissed her forehead and lied. I am very good at lying. My hand went to my forehead, remembering that gesture. All those years, I'd thought it was dismissal. It had been protection. I flipped ahead, grabbing journals at random. March 1987, October 1992, June 2003. The pattern was always the same: medical updates on the victims, payments made, and scattered between them, entries about me. Shirley wore blue today.
She doesn't know that blue makes her eyes look like the ocean I promised to take her to, but never have. I'm building her a conservatory instead, because I can control the temperature in a conservatory. I cannot control anything else. Our 10th anniversary. I bought her diamonds because I don't know how to give her what she really wants. A husband who comes to bed at night instead of hiding in his study with ledgers full of dying men's names. She stopped asking me what I do on Tuesdays. I think she's given up trying to understand me. I don't blame her. I gave up trying to understand myself years ago. I grabbed the most recent journal, dated just weeks before his death. The handwriting was shakier, but the entries were longer, more desperate. November 12th, 2025, 40 years today since the spill. Jerome Washington died this morning, kidney failure, a delayed consequence of the chemical exposure. I attended his funeral from the back row where his family wouldn't see me. His granddaughter sang, "She has his eyes." I went to the bank afterward and added $50,000 to the scholarship fund I set up in his name. Then I came home and Shirley was arranging flowers, and I wanted to tell her everything. I wanted to fall at her feet and confess and beg her forgiveness for wasting our marriage with silence and shame. But I'm a coward. So instead, I'm writing this letter, this confession, and praying that someday, when I'm gone and Shirley finally opens the box, she'll understand that every Tuesday for 40 years I went to that bank and I thought of her. Every payment I made, every name I recorded, every small act of penance, it was all for her. To become someone worthy of the woman who married me when I was still young enough to believe I could be saved. Shirley, my love, my only love, if you're reading this, it means I've finally run out of time to tell you in person. So let me tell you now, you were the reason. For all of it. The company I built, the money I made, even the guilt I carried, it was all so that someday I might look at you and see something other than disappointment in your eyes. I loved you every day of our marriage. I just never learned how to show it in a way that mattered. The words blurred. I was weeping openly now. 40 years of misunderstanding pouring out of me in the fluorescent lit vault of a community bank where my husband had come every Tuesday to be the man he couldn't be at home. I walked into the emergency board meeting 3 days later, carrying a single leather journal and a banker's box full of receipts. Marcus was already seated at the head of the table, David's chair, flanked by 2 board members I recognized as his allies. The rest looked uncomfortable, caught between loyalty to a dead man and survival instinct. Marcus didn't stand when I entered. "Aunt Shirley, I'm glad you could join us. We were just discussing the transition of power given the, shall we say, irregularities in Uncle David's final affairs." There were no irregularities. I set the box on the table with a thud that made Richard Chen jump. There was only a man trying to do the right thing for 40 years while the rest of you got rich. "Shirley," Patricia Voss began, her voice gentle, pitying. "Mrs. Schweiger," I corrected, or better yet, Mrs. Schweiger, partner, since that's what David intended and what I'm claiming today. Marcus laughed. Actually laughed. "You can't be serious. You have no experience running a company. You've been a decorative housewife for 40 decades. I've been the wife of a man who paid $17 million in medical expenses for workers he harmed, who set up scholarship funds for their children, who spent every Tuesday for 40 years trying to atone for one terrible decision." I opened the journal to a marked page. March 1984. David writes, "I cut corners on the ventilation system to meet quarterly projections. I knew it was dangerous. I approved it anyway." The room went silent. He spent the rest of his life paying for it. Not because he had to. The EPA investigation went nowhere, the lawsuits were settled quietly, but because he couldn't live with himself if he didn't. I looked at each board member in turn. That's the man you worked for, not the shark you all pretended he was. The shark was easier to understand, wasn't it? Easier to excuse your own compromises when you worked for a monster. "This is ancient history," Marcus said, but his voice had lost its edge. "Sentimental garbage that doesn't change the fact that the company needs leadership." It has leadership. I pulled out a document, slid it across to Patricia. David revised his will 1 week before he died. This codicil, filed separately with a different attorney, names me as co-CEO with veto power over any board decisions regarding company direction, charitable contributions, or executive appointments. Patricia scanned it, her eyes widening. This is legally binding." "My uncle would never," Marcus started. "Your uncle knew exactly what you were, Marcus. He wrote about you too." I flipped to another page. "Marcus has my ambition but none of my guilt. That makes him more dangerous than I ever was. If he takes control, he'll undo everything I've built. Not the company, but the penance. I can't let that happen." I closed the journal and looked Marcus directly. "You're fired, effective immediately. Security will escort you out." "You can't. The board," I said softly, "will support me, because I'm about to do something David never had the courage to do. I'm going public with all of it. The spill, the victims, the 40 years of payments. I'm establishing the David Schweiger Redemption Foundation and seeding it with $200 million. Every cent he paid in secret will now pay openly. Every family he helped will continue helping. You'll destroy his reputation. The company's stock will reflect the truth that we're a company built on one man's mistake and sustained by his determination to make it right." I picked up a pen, signed my name at the bottom of the meeting minutes. "This meeting is adjourned. Someone call Agent Reeves. I have information about those offshore accounts she was looking for. Turns out they were all charitable trusts David set up to continue the work after his death. He just never told anyone." As I walked out, I heard Patricia's voice, quiet but clear. "All in favor of supporting Mrs. Schweiger's motion." The ayes were unanimous. I didn't look back. Outside, the city stretched before me, the same skyline David conquered and that conquered him. I thought of the flower seller, the veteran, the 17 names in that first journal, the Tuesday people David had known better than he'd ever known me. I would know them now. I would finish what he'd started. And every Tuesday for the rest of my life, I would go to that bank and remember the man who'd loved me the only way he knew how, by trying in secret and silence to become someone worthy of being loved in return.